My daughter-in-law laughed at me while I was renting. "You're going to die poor and alone." When I bought a villa of my own, my son showed up and said, "Great, my wife will love raising our kids here." I smiled and simply made a phone call. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Nadine, and at 66 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of cruelty life could offer. I was wrong." The invitation to Desmond's birthday dinner arrived on cream-colored cardstock, the kind Brian insisted on for everything. "Join us for an intimate family celebration," it read in her perfectly scripted handwriting. I should have known better. Nothing Brian organized was ever truly about family. I spent the afternoon getting ready, choosing my best dress from the small collection I'd maintained since Richard's funeral 3 years ago, the navy blue one with tiny pearl buttons that he'd always loved. I even splurged on having my silver hair professionally styled at the salon downtown. Foolish, really, considering my tight budget, but it was my son's 38th birthday. Some occasions called for effort. The restaurant Brian had chosen was the kind of place that screamed money. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths so crisp they could cut paper, and waiters who moved like dancers around tables that cost more for one meal than I spent on groceries in a month. I clutched my small purse tighter as the hostess led me to their table. Desmond stood to greet me, and for a moment, I saw flashes of the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, embracing him. He felt stiffer than I remembered, more formal. Brian had trained him well. "Thanks for coming, Mom." His smile seemed genuine enough, but there was something distant in his eyes. Brian sat beside him, her blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She offered me a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Nadine, how lovely. You look presentable." The word hung in the air like a slap. Presentable. Not beautiful, not elegant, not even nice. Presentable. As if I were a charity case she was graciously allowing at their table. The evening started innocuously enough. Desmond talked about his promotion at the law firm. Brian mentioned their upcoming vacation to Italy, and I listened, nodding at appropriate moments, trying to contribute when I could. But every comment I made seemed to amuse Brian in ways that made my chest tighten. When the waiter brought the wine list, Brian made a show of ordering something expensive. "We'll have the Chateau Margaux," she announced, then glanced at me with mock concern. "Oh, but maybe we should order something more. Economical? I know things have been tight since you moved to that little apartment." My cheeks burned. Yes, I lived in a modest rental now. After Richard died, the big house felt too empty, too full of memories, but the way she said it made it sound like I was living in squalor. "The wine sounds lovely," I managed, my voice steady despite the humiliation creeping up my throat. Dinner conversation continued, but I noticed how Brian steered every topic toward money, success, and their comfortable life. When I mentioned volunteering at the community center, she laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, Nadine, that's so sweet. Playing bingo with other lonely old ladies. How fulfilling that must be for you." Desmond said nothing. He just cut his steak and avoided my eyes. The breaking point came when Brian excused herself to the restroom. I thought maybe I could connect with my son, talk to him the way we used to before she came into the picture. But when I reached across the table to touch his hand, he pulled away. "Mom, about your living situation," he started, his voice uncomfortable. "What about it?" "Well, Brian and I have been talking. We're concerned about you living alone in that neighborhood. Maybe it's time to consider other options." Other options. The words chilled me. What kind of other options? Before he could answer, Brian returned, sliding into her seat with a satisfied smile. "Oh, good. You're discussing Nadine's future. I was telling Desmond just yesterday how worried we are." She leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "Honey, you're not getting any younger, living alone, struggling to make ends meet. It's not sustainable. There are some lovely assisted living facilities that offer very reasonable rates." The room seemed to tilt. Assisted living. They wanted to put me away. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Brian's laugh was sharp, cutting. Oh, sweetheart, of course you think that. But let's be realistic. You're living in a tiny rental, probably eating canned soup for dinner, volunteering just to have somewhere to go during the day. It's honestly quite sad. She reached for her wine glass, taking a leisurely sip before delivering the final blow. I mean, let's face it, you're going to die poor and alone anyway. Wouldn't it be better to have some dignity in your final years? The words hit me like physical blows. Die poor and alone. The casual cruelty of it, the way she smiled as she said it, as if she were discussing the weather. I looked at Desmond, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife she'd gone too far. He said nothing, just stared at his plate, his jaw tight but his mouth firmly shut. Brian continued, apparently enjoying my silence. We're only thinking of what's best for you. Desmond works so hard, and we're planning to start a family soon. We can't be expected to take care of you too. Take care of me. As if I were a burden they'd been graciously carrying instead of the woman who'd raised Desmond alone after his father left, who'd worked double shifts to pay for his college, who'd celebrated every achievement and comforted him through every disappointment. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. Excuse me, I whispered, grabbing my purse. Where are you going? Brian called after me, but I didn't answer. I walked through that elegant restaurant on unsteady legs, past tables full of families who actually seemed to love each other, past couples holding hands over candlelit dinners. The hostess smiled as I passed, probably thinking I was heading to the restroom. Instead, I walked straight out into the cool night air and kept walking until I reached my car. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys. Behind me, I could hear the restaurant door opening, footsteps on the pavement. Mom, wait! Desmond's voice called out. I turned, hope flickering in my chest. Maybe he'd come to apologize, to tell me Brian had been out of line. You can't just leave like that. Brian feels terrible about what she said. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised, looking for any sign of the boy who used to defend me against playground bullies. Does she? Of course she does. She was just trying to help. We both are. There it was. Even now, he was taking her side, making excuses for her cruelty. I realized with crushing clarity that I'd already lost my son. Brian had won completely. Tell her not to worry about me, I said quietly, getting into my car. I'll be just fine. As I drove away, I saw them in my rearview mirror, Desmond and Brian standing together on the sidewalk, probably already discussing how dramatic I was being, how unreasonable. That night, alone in my small apartment, I sat in Richard's old chair and cried until there were no tears left. But somewhere between the grief and the humiliation, something else began to grow. Something harder, more determined. They thought they knew me. They thought I was just a poor, pathetic old woman with nothing left but their reluctant charity. How wrong they were. The morning after Desmond's birthday dinner, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The tears were gone, replaced by something much more dangerous, determination. I made my coffee the way Richard used to, strong and black, and sat at my small kitchen table with a stack of documents I hadn't touched in months. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, papers that told a very different story than the one Brian thought she knew. Most people would be surprised to learn that the poor old woman living in a modest rental apartment was worth just over $2 million. Richard had been brilliant with money, you see. Not just the steady income from his engineering job, but smart investments that grew quietly over 30 years of marriage. Apple stock purchased in the 80s, real estate investments in neighborhoods everyone said would never amount to anything, a diversified portfolio that weathered every market crash and came out stronger. When he died, he left me everything. Take care of yourself, Nadine, his letter had said. You deserve better than anyone gave you credit for. But I'd made a conscious choice to live simply. After Desmond married Brian, I'd watched her transform my sweet, thoughtful son into someone I barely recognized. Someone who cared more about appearances than substance, more about what people could do for him than who they really were. So I'd decided to test them. I moved to a smaller place, drove an older car, dressed modestly. I wanted to see what kind of people they'd become when they thought I had nothing to offer them. I'd hoped I was wrong. I'd prayed that Desmond would invite me over just to spend time together, that Brian would show some genuine kindness, that they'd love me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Last night had answered that question definitively. I spread the papers across my table like a general planning a campaign. The largest investment account showed a balance that would make Brian's designer dress budget look like pocket change. There were CDs, bonds, and 3 rental properties I managed through a property company. Income Desmond had never known about because I'd never needed to use it. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Desmond's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I answered. "Hello, Desmond." "Mom, thank God. I've been calling all morning. Look, about last night. What about it?" His voice was strained, like he was forcing himself through an unpleasant task. "Brian feels horrible about what she said. She didn't mean it the way it sounded." I almost laughed. How did she mean it then? "She was just concerned about your future. We both are. Maybe we didn't express it well, but we love you. Love." The word sounded hollow coming from him now. "I see. So you'll forgive her? Maybe come over for dinner this weekend?" Brian wants to apologize properly. I imagined Brian practicing her apology in the mirror, perfecting just the right tone of manufactured remorse. I'll think about it. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and thought about the woman I used to be. Before Richard died, I'd been confident, social, involved in community organizations and charity work. I'd hosted dinner parties and traveled with friends. But grief had made me smaller, more cautious. Brian's cruelty the night before had awakened something I'd forgotten I possessed, the strength that had gotten me through raising Desmond alone when his father abandoned us, the determination that had helped me build a career when women my age were expected to stay home. I picked up my phone and called my attorney, Margaret Chen. We'd worked together when Richard died, and she'd handled all my financial planning since then. "Nadine, how lovely to hear from you. How are things?" "Complicated," I said. "I need to make some changes to my will." "Of course. What kind of changes?" I took a deep breath, thinking of Desmond's silence the night before, his inability to defend me against his wife's cruelty. "I want to remove my son as beneficiary." Margaret's pause was brief but telling. "That's a significant decision. May I ask why?" "Let's just say I've learned some things about his character that concern me." "All right. Who would you like to designate instead?" I'd been thinking about this all morning. There was a charity Richard and I had supported for years, Silver Connections, which provided companionship and support for elderly people who'd been abandoned by their families. People like I was becoming. "I want everything to go to Silver Connections," I said. "Every penny." "That's very generous, Nadine. Are you absolutely certain about this? It's not irreversible, but it is substantial." I thought about Brian's laugh, her casual dismissal of my life as meaningless. "I'm certain." "I'll draft the documents. When would you like to come in to sign them?" "Today, if possible." After I hung up, I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet I'd been ignoring for months. Behind my everyday clothes hung the wardrobe of the woman I used to be. Designer suits from my working days, elegant dresses from charity galas, jewelry that Richard had given me for anniversaries and birthdays. I pulled out a black Chanel suit I'd bought years ago and held it up to myself in the mirror. It still fit perfectly. I'd been hiding my light under a bushel, as my grandmother used to say. And for what? To protect the feelings of people who clearly didn't care about mine? No more. I spent the afternoon at Margaret's office, signing documents that would ensure my money went to people who would actually appreciate it. On the way home, I stopped at the salon where I'd had my hair done the day before. "Mrs. Winters," the stylist, Jenny, greeted me with surprise. "Back so soon? I'd like to make some changes," I said. Something more. Me. When I left the salon 2 hours later, my silver hair was cut in a sleek bob that took years off my face. I felt lighter, more like the woman I'd been before grief and loneliness had convinced me to make myself small. That evening, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine. Not the cheap stuff I'd been buying, but a bottle from the collection Richard and I had started together. I raised the glass in a toast to his memory. "You were right, darling," I said to his photograph on the mantel. "I do deserve better." My phone buzzed with a text from Desmond. "Mom, Brian really wants to make things right. Can you come for dinner Sunday? She's making your favorite pot roast. I stared at the message for a long time before responding, I'll be there. But I wouldn't be coming as the grateful, diminished woman they expected. I'd be coming as myself, the real Nadine, the one with means and options and absolutely nothing left to lose. They wanted to play games with my life? Fine. But they were about to discover they'd chosen the wrong opponent. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was someone I hadn't seen in years, confident, determined, ready for whatever came next. Tomorrow, I would start shopping for a house, something worthy of the woman I really was, not the facade I'd been maintaining for people who'd never deserved it. Brian thought I was going to die poor and alone. How little she understood about the power of a woman who'd finally stopped caring what anyone else thought. The house hunting began that Monday morning. I'd spent the weekend researching properties online, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of what my money could buy. Mrs. Winters, my realtor, Patricia Vance, said as we pulled into the circular driveway of the third property that day, I think you're going to love this one. She wasn't wrong. The colonial-style mansion sat on 2 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, with towering oak trees that must have been 100 years old. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a library with built-in shelves that reached the ceiling, and a kitchen that belonged in a magazine. The asking price was $850,000, a fortune to most people, but well within my means. It's beautiful, I breathed, running my fingers along the marble countertops in the kitchen. Through the bay window, I could see a garden that would be spectacular in spring, and beyond that, a small pond with a wooden bridge. The previous owners were an elderly couple who maintained it impeccably, Patricia explained. They moved to Florida last month. All the major systems have been updated, and that library, I understand you mentioned loving to read? I nodded, picturing myself in that room with its leather chairs and fireplace, surrounded by books instead of the silence of my small apartment. This was what Richard would have wanted for me. This was the life I deserved. I'll take it, I said. Patricia blinked. Don't you want to see the upstairs? Or discuss the offer? We could probably negotiate. Full asking price, I interrupted. Cash sale. How quickly can we close? Her surprise was almost comical. Well, with a cash offer, probably within 2 weeks. Are you certain? Absolutely. By Wednesday, the paperwork was complete. By Friday, I was signing closing documents and receiving the keys to my new home. I'd never felt more empowered in my life. The moving process was simple. I hired professionals to handle everything while I supervised from my new library, already furnished with a few pieces I'd ordered online. I'd kept only the things that mattered, Richard's photographs, my books, and a few pieces of furniture with sentimental value. Everything else was donated or sold. I waited until I was fully settled before calling Desmond. 3 weeks had passed since his birthday dinner, and I hadn't spoken to him since agreeing to Sunday dinner, an engagement I'd never kept. Mom, where have you been? We expected you for dinner and then you just disappeared. Brian was so worried. I settled into my new leather chair, looking out at my garden where workers were planting spring bulbs. I've been busy. Moving. Moving? What do you mean moving? Where? I bought a house, Desmond. A proper house. The silence on the other end stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke, his voice strained with confusion. You bought a house? How? I mean, what kind of house? A lovely colonial on Maple Ridge Drive. 6 bedrooms, beautiful grounds. I'm very happy with it. Maple Ridge Drive? His voice cracked slightly. Mom, those houses cost more than you expected I could afford, I imagine. Another long pause. I don't understand. Where did you get the money? I could have explained then. I could have told him about the investments, about Richard's careful planning, about the life insurance policies and rental properties. Instead, I simply said, your father was a very wise man with money, but you said, you were struggling. The small apartment, the tight budget. I chose to live simply, Desmond. There's a difference. I could hear muffled voices in the background, Brian demanding to know what was happening. Then Desmond's voice became more formal, more distant. Well, that's wonderful, Mom. Really. We should come see it. You should. This weekend, Saturday afternoon? That would be fine. After I hung up, I walked through my beautiful new home, imagining the conversation that was undoubtedly happening between Desmond and Brian. I'd seen enough of their relationship to predict exactly how it would go. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather. I spent the morning arranging fresh flowers in the front hall and preparing coffee and pastries, though I suspected this visit wouldn't be social for long. Desmond's BMW pulled into my driveway at exactly 2 o'clock. Through the window, I watched them sit in the car for several minutes, Brian gesticulating wildly while Desmond gripped the steering wheel. Finally, they emerged. Brian had dressed for the occasion in what I recognized as her impress the wealthy neighbor's outfit, a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She wore the expression she reserved for people she considered important, bright, calculating smile and eyes that missed nothing. I opened the door before they could knock. Desmond, Brian. Welcome, Mom. Desmond hugged me, but I could feel the tension in his shoulders. This is incredible. Brian stepped past him, her eyes already cataloging everything visible from the entryway. Nadine, what a surprise. This is quite substantial. Thank you. Would you like a tour? What followed was 30 minutes of barely concealed assessment. Brian admired each room with the practiced eye of someone evaluating real estate rather than visiting family. She noted the square footage, the quality of the fixtures, the view from each window. Desmond followed quietly, his expression growing more troubled with each room we entered. When we reached the master suite, a spacious room with a sitting area and French doors opening onto a private balcony, Brian finally dropped her facade. This is enormous, she said, running her hand along the silk curtains. Much too big for one person, really. I like the space, I replied evenly. Oh, of course, but practically speaking. She turned to face me with that sharp smile. I mean, at your age, is it really safe to be rattling around in a house this size? All these stairs, the maintenance, the isolation? Desmond shifted uncomfortably. Brian, I'm just being practical, honey. Your mother is nearly 70. What if she falls? What if something happens? Who would even know? I led them back downstairs to the living room, where I'd laid out coffee and pastries on the antique table I'd inherited from my grandmother. As we sat, Brian continued her assault under the guise of concern. The property taxes alone must be astronomical, she mused, selecting a croissant. And heating costs, insurance, upkeep. It seems like such a burden for someone on a fixed income. I managed just fine, I said, pouring coffee from the silver service that had been my wedding gift from Richard's parents. Brian exchanged a meaningful look with Desmond before continuing. Well, that's wonderful, of course. But we've been thinking, haven't we, honey, about our future. We're trying to start a family, and with Desmond's new position at the firm, we're outgrowing our current place. I sipped my coffee and waited. What Brian's trying to say, Desmond interjected, his voice carefully casual, is that this house would be perfect for a growing family. All these bedrooms going to waste, the big yard for children to play in. It would be ideal, Brian agreed, her eyes bright with anticipation. And you'd have company. You wouldn't be alone anymore. We could take care of you, help with the maintenance and expenses. The audacity of it took my breath away. They were actually suggesting that I'd bought this house for them, that my careful planning, my years of financial discipline, my independence, all of it was somehow meant to benefit them. Plus, Brian continued, warming to her theme, it would be so much better for the children. This neighborhood, these schools, they're exactly what we want for our family. Desmond leaned forward, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the little boy I'd raised. What do you think, Mom? Wouldn't it be nice to have family around? To hear children's laughter in these rooms? They sat there, both of them, waiting for my response with the confident expectation that I would, of course, see the wisdom in their suggestion. That I would be grateful for their willingness to rescue me from the burden of my beautiful home. I set down my coffee cup very carefully and looked at each of them in turn. That's an interesting proposal, I said finally. Brian's smile widened. I knew you'd see the sense in it. We could work out all the details. Maybe you could keep the master suite, and we could use the other bedrooms. The children would love having Grandma right there. Brian's already been sketching out ideas for the nursery, Desmond added. That sunny room on the second floor would be perfect. I nodded thoughtfully. You've certainly given this considerable thought. We just want what's best for everyone, Brian said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. It's what family does. We take care of each other. Family. The word that had been used to manipulate me for years, to make me accept less, expect less, settle for crumbs of affection while giving everything in return. I smiled then, a real smile, the first genuine one I'd worn in their presence in years. You're absolutely right, Brian. Family should take care of each other. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and walked to the window overlooking my garden. Behind me, I could hear them whispering excitedly, already making plans for their new home. I need to make a phone call, I said, turning back to them. Would you excuse me for just a moment? As I walked toward my study, I heard Brian's delighted whisper to Desmond. I told you she'd come around. This is going to be perfect. Perfect. Yes, I thought as I reached for my phone. It was going to be exactly that. I closed the study door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of excitement from the living room. Brian's voice carried clearly through the walls as she described her vision for our new home to Desmond. Our home, as if she'd already moved in, already taken possession. My hands were surprisingly steady as I picked up the phone and dialed Margaret's number. Margaret Chen's office. This is Sarah. This is Nadine Winters. I need to speak with Margaret immediately. It's urgent. One moment, please, Mrs. Winters. The hold music seemed to stretch on forever, punctuated by bursts of laughter from the other room. I could picture Brian examining my belongings with new eyes, no longer seeing them as mine, but as hers. The crystal vases that had been wedding gifts, the paintings Richard and I had collected during our travels, the antique furniture passed down through generations, all of it being mentally redistributed to suit her taste. Nadine? Margaret's voice was concerned. Sarah said it was urgent. Is everything all right? I need to make immediate changes to my will, today, if possible. What kind of changes? We just updated everything 3 weeks ago. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden where I'd planned to spend peaceful mornings with my coffee and books. In the reflection, I could see my own face, calm, determined, finally free of the desperate hope that had kept me clinging to the illusion of family love. I want to add specific language about my house, very specific language. All right, what did you have in mind? I want it clearly stated that under no circumstances is my son or his wife to inherit this property. They are never to live here, never to own it, never to benefit from it in any way. Margaret's pause was longer this time. Nadine, that's quite definitive. May I ask what's prompted this? Through the door, I could hear Desmond's voice. The master bedroom has such good natural light. You'd love the walk-in closet, Brian. They're here now, I said quietly. In my home. Already planning how to redecorate it, where to put the children's rooms, how to help me manage the burden of homeownership. I see. Margaret's tone had shifted to professional concern. Are you feeling pressured? Because if there's any question of elder abuse or manipulation— No, I interrupted. Nothing like that. They're not forcing me to do anything. They're simply showing me exactly who they are, and I'm finally listening. What else would you like to specify? I thought of Brian's excited whispers, of Desmond's casual assumption that my life's work was somehow meant to benefit him. I want the house to go to Silver Connections as well, along with everything else. And I want a clause stating that if either my son or his wife attempts to contest the will, they forfeit any right to even visit the property during the charity's ownership. That's legally enforceable, Margaret confirmed. Anything else? Yes. I want you to draft a letter to be delivered to them after my death. Something that explains exactly why these decisions were made. Would you like to dictate that now? I could hear Brian's voice getting closer to the study door. They were coming to find me, probably wondering what was taking so long. Not over the phone. Can you come here? Today? I can be there in an hour. Will that work? Perfect. Use the back entrance. Through the garden gate. I'll be waiting in the sunroom. After I hung up, I took a moment to compose myself before returning to my guests. They were standing in the center of my living room, Brian with her phone out, apparently taking pictures, just getting some measurements, she said with that bright smile, for furniture placement. I hope you don't mind. Not at all. I settled back into my chair, noting how they'd both remained standing, as if sitting would somehow delay their planning process. Did you want to see the rest of the house? The basement is finished. It would make a wonderful playroom. Brian's eyes lit up. Oh, that sounds perfect. And the attic? Storage space mostly, but it could be converted, perhaps into a home office. For the next hour, I played the part they expected, the grateful elderly woman overwhelmed by her good fortune and their generous offer to share it. I nodded as Brian described her decorating ideas, smiled as Desmond pointed out practical improvements they could make, even offered to show them the property boundaries so they could plan their garden. They ate it up, these two people who thought they knew me so well, who saw my politeness as weakness, my generosity as obligation, my love as something they could exploit without consequence. We should probably get going, Desmond finally said, glancing at his watch. We have dinner plans with the Hendersons. Of course. I walked them to the door, accepting Brian's air kisses and Desmond's distracted hug. We'll talk more about the arrangements soon, Brian said, already mentally inhabiting my home. There are so many details to work out, but I'm sure we can make it wonderful for everyone. I'm sure we can, I agreed. After their car disappeared down the driveway, I walked through my house with new eyes. Every room they'd claimed, every space they'd mentally redistributed, every assumption they'd made about my gratitude for their intervention. Margaret arrived exactly 1 hour later, carrying her leather briefcase and wearing the expression of someone prepared for difficult conversations. "Show me the house," she said without preamble. "I want to understand what we're protecting." I gave her the full tour, explaining not just the property, but the scene that had played out earlier. Margaret listened without comment, making notes in her precise handwriting. "They really believe you bought this place for them?" she asked as we settled in the sunroom with tea. "Completely. In their minds, everything I do is somehow meant to benefit them. My financial struggles were an inconvenience to be managed. My success is an asset to be claimed." Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. "Let's draft that letter. What do you want them to know?" I stared out at my garden, thinking of all the years I'd spent trying to earn their love, their respect, their simple acknowledgement of my worth as a human being. "I want them to understand that love isn't one-sided," I said finally. "That family isn't about what you can take from each other, but what you give freely. I want them to know that I saw through their performance, that I knew exactly what they thought of me. And the house specifically, I want them to know that this house, my house, will become a place where elderly people abandoned by their families can find community and care, that it will shelter people whose own children saw them as burdens rather than blessings." Margaret wrote quickly, her pen scratching across the paper. "What else?" "I want them to know that I had a choice, that right up until today I could have chosen differently, but they made it impossible to love them, and that's not my failure. It's theirs." As Margaret drafted the documents, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For years, I'd blamed myself for the distance between Desmond and me. I'd wondered what I could have done differently, how I could have been a better mother, a more deserving recipient of their affection. But today had shown me the truth. It wasn't about what I'd done or failed to do. It was about who they'd chosen to become. People who saw others only in terms of utility, who confused manipulation with love, who believed they were entitled to whatever they could take. "There," Margaret said, looking up from her writing. "How does this sound?" She read the letter aloud, and I found myself nodding at each sentence. It was clear, honest, and final. No room for misinterpretation, no opportunity for them to rewrite the narrative in their favor. "Perfect," I said. "When can you have the will updated? I'll have everything ready for your signature by Monday." "Are you absolutely certain about this, Nadine? Once these documents are signed and notarized, they'll be very difficult to change." I thought of Brian's excited whispers, of Desmond's casual assumption that my home was somehow his to claim. I thought of years of being treated like an inconvenience, a burden, a source of guilt and obligation rather than love. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. After Margaret left, I walked through my house one more time, seeing it not as the prize Brian thought she'd won, but as my sanctuary. My choice. My independence made manifest in brick and mortar and beautiful, peaceful rooms. Tomorrow, Desmond would probably call to discuss their moving timeline. Brian would likely start shopping for furniture and making lists of renovations. They would plan their future in my space, with my money, using my generosity against me one final time. They had no idea that with every assumption, every entitled expectation, every casual dismissal of my autonomy, they were signing away any claim to my love, my money, or my beautiful home. In 3 days, the new will would be signed. In 3 days, their future would belong entirely to them, without my house, without my money, and without any hope of claiming either. The thought should have made me sad. Instead, as I watched the sunset paint my garden in shades of gold and amber, I felt nothing but profound, peaceful satisfaction. They'd made their choice. Now I'd made mine. The call came at 7 in the morning, 3 days after I'd signed the new will. I was in my kitchen, savoring my first cup of coffee while watching birds gather at the feeder I'd installed outside the window. The caller ID showed Desmond's number, and something in the urgency of the early hour told me this wasn't a social call. "Mom, we need to talk. Right now." No greeting, no pleasantries. His voice carried an edge I hadn't heard since he was a teenager caught in a lie. "Good morning to you too, Desmond. What's so urgent?" "Don't play games with me. I know what you did." I set down my coffee cup carefully, though my heart had begun to race. "What exactly do you think I did?" "The will, Mom. Margaret Chen's office called yesterday. Something about updated documents and needing to confirm the property address." "Ah." Margaret had warned me that routine verification calls were standard practice, but I'd hoped we'd have more time before the confrontation. Still, I felt oddly calm as I prepared for what was coming. "I see. And what did they tell you?" "Nothing directly, but when I pressed them about why they needed our property information, they said it wasn't relevant since we weren't beneficiaries." "We aren't beneficiaries, Mom." The accusation hung in the air between us. I could hear Brian's voice in the background, sharp and demanding, though I couldn't make out the words. "Would you like to come over and discuss this?" I asked. "We're already on our way." The line went dead. I looked around my peaceful kitchen, knowing it might be the last quiet moment I'd have for a while. Then I went upstairs to dress properly for what was about to be a very difficult day. They arrived within 20 minutes, which meant they'd been calling from their car. Brian's face was flushed with anger when I opened the door, and Desmond looked like he hadn't slept. "Inside. Now!" Brian demanded, pushing past me into the foyer. I followed them into the living room, where they both remained standing, positioned like prosecutors about to deliver an indictment. "How could you do this to us?" Brian's voice was shrill, all pretense of politeness abandoned. "After everything we've done for you, after all our plans." "What plans?" I interrupted quietly. "Don't act innocent," Desmond snapped. "You let us believe we were going to live here. You encouraged us to make plans for the children, for our future." I sat down in my favorite chair, the one that faced the garden. "I did no such thing. I listened while you made assumptions." "Assumptions?" Brian's laugh was bitter. "You showed us around like we were already living here. You talked about the children's rooms, about having family close by. I was being polite. You were guests in my home." "Guests?" Desmond's voice cracked. "I'm your son. Yes, you are. And I'm your mother. But that doesn't make my house your house, or my money your money." Brian began pacing, her designer heels clicking angrily on my hardwood floors. "This is insane. You're nearly 70 years old, living alone in a house that's way too big for you. We offered to help, to take care of you, and this is how you repay us? By maintaining ownership of my own property? By lying to us," she screamed. "By letting us plan our lives around something you never intended to give us." I looked at Desmond, who was staring at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. "Is that how you see it too? That I lied to you?" He lifted his head, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes that might have been pain. "Mom, we need this house. My promotion comes with certain expectations, social obligations. Brian's pregnant." "Pregnant?" The word escaped before I could stop it. Brian's hand went to her still flat stomach, her expression shifting from anger to smugness. 3 months. We were going to tell you when we moved in. Make it a celebration. A grandchild. Another grandchild I would likely never know, never hold, never be allowed to love. The realization should have broken my heart, but instead, it strengthened my resolve. Congratulations, I said simply. Congratulations? Brian stared at me in disbelief. That's it? Your son is having a baby and all you can say is congratulations? What would you like me to say? That you're sorry, that you'll fix this, that you'll put us back in the will where we belong. Where you belong, I repeated. And where exactly do you think that is? Desmond stepped forward, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he used in court. Mom, let's be reasonable here. You don't need a house this size. The maintenance alone must be overwhelming. And with a baby coming, we really do need more space. So buy a bigger house? With what money? Brian shrieked. Do you know what houses cost in decent neighborhoods? Do you know what private schools cost? What it takes to give children the kind of life they deserve? The kind of life your child deserves, I corrected. Your responsibility, not mine. Brian's face went white with rage. You selfish, bitter old woman. No wonder your husband left you alone to raise Desmond. No wonder your own son can barely stand to visit you. The words hit like physical blows, but I didn't flinch. Richard didn't leave me, Brian. He died. And if Desmond can barely stand to visit me, why would you want to live in my house? Because it's not your house, she screamed. Not really. Desmond is your only child, your only family. Everything you have should go to him automatically. That's how families work. Is it? I stood up, walking to the mantel where Richard's photograph sat beside pictures of Desmond as a child. Tell me, Brian, in your family, did your parents work double shifts to pay for your college? Did they sacrifice their own comfort so you could have opportunities? That's different. That's what parents are supposed to do. And what are children supposed to do? She faltered for a moment, caught off guard by the question. Desmond answered instead. Children are supposed to be grateful. They're supposed to take care of their parents when they get old. Take care of them, I repeated. Not take from them. Not treat them like inconveniences to be managed or assets to be claimed. We never treated you like an inconvenience, Desmond protested. I turned to face him fully. Really? Then why did Brian suggest I move to assisted living? Why did she tell me I was going to die poor and alone? Why did you sit there and let her say those things? His face flushed. She was just concerned about your safety. No, she wasn't. She was concerned about her comfort. About not having to deal with an aging mother-in-law who might become a burden. Brian had stopped pacing and was staring at me with naked hatred. You're twisting everything. We offered to let you stay here, to take care of you. You offered to let me stay in my own house while you took it over. You offered to manage my life for me because you decided I wasn't capable of managing it myself. Because you're not, she exploded. Look at you. Living alone, no friends, no social life, nothing to do but sit in this huge house and feel sorry for yourself. We were trying to help you by taking my house, by giving your life meaning, by letting you be part of something bigger than your pathetic little existence. The words hung in the air like poison. Desmond looked stricken, as if he was finally hearing what his wife actually thought of me. Brian, he said quietly, that's enough. No, it's not enough, she whirled on him. Your mother is being deliberately cruel. She's punishing us for trying to build a life, for wanting better for our children. She's a jealous, vindictive old woman who can't stand to see anyone else happy. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. Inside were copies of the new will, along with the letter Margaret had helped me draft. Since you seem so interested in my will, I said, handing the folder to Desmond, you might as well know the whole truth. He opened it with trembling hands, Brian reading over his shoulder. I watched their faces change as they absorbed the contents. Confusion giving way to shock, shock to horror, horror to rage. You left everything to charity? Desmond's voice was barely a whisper. To Silver Connections, yes. They help elderly people who've been abandoned by their families. Abandoned? Brian's voice was dangerous now. We never abandoned you. Didn't you? When was the last time either of you called just to talk? When was the last time you invited me somewhere without wanting something? When was the last time you treated me like a person you loved, instead of an obligation you resented. Desmond was still staring at the papers. The house, the investments, everything? Everything. Brian snatched the documents from his hands, scanning them frantically. This can't be legal. You can't just cut out your only child. There are laws. There are laws about elder abuse, I said calmly. There are laws about coercion and manipulation. But there are no laws requiring me to leave my money to people who treat me with contempt. We'll contest this, she snarled. We'll fight it in court. I smiled then, the first real smile I'd worn since they arrived. Read the last page, Brian. The part about what happens if you contest the will. Her eyes flew to the document, and I watched her face drain of color as she read the clause Margaret had insisted we include. If you contest the will, I said pleasantly, you forfeit any right to visit this property, even after it becomes a care facility for abandoned elderly people. You'll be legally barred from ever setting foot here again. You can't do this, Desmond said, his voice breaking. I'm your son. Yes, you are. And I'm your mother. But being family doesn't give you the right to my life, my money, or my home. It certainly doesn't give you the right to treat me like a burden while expecting to inherit my assets. Brian threw the papers on the floor, her face twisted with fury. You'll regret this. When you're dying alone in this house, when you have no one to take care of you, you'll remember this moment and wish you'd been different. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the polished, beautiful woman who'd stolen my son's affection, but a small, grasping person whose entire sense of worth depended on what she could take from others. I won't be dying alone, Brian. I'll be surrounded by people who've learned, as I have, that blood doesn't make family. Love does. Respect does. And neither of you has shown me either in years. They left then, Desmond gathering the scattered papers while Brian stormed toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. Mom, please. There has to be a way to fix this. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for, and felt nothing but profound sadness for what he'd become. There was always a way to fix this, Desmond. You just never bothered to try. After the door closed behind them, I stood in my foyer listening to their car start, listening to them drive away from my life for what I knew would be the last time. Then I walked to my kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat down to enjoy the most peaceful morning I'd had in years. 6 months passed before I heard from them again. 6 months of the most peaceful, fulfilling life I'd lived since Richard's death. I'd thrown myself into activities I'd forgotten I enjoyed, hosting book clubs in my library, volunteering at the community center, taking painting classes at the local art studio. My house had become what it was always meant to be, a home, not a monument to loneliness. The call came on a Tuesday morning in spring. I was in my garden, planting the roses I'd ordered from a catalog, when my phone rang from inside the house. I almost didn't answer it, but something about the persistence of the ringing made me wipe my hands on my gardening apron and go inside. Hello? Mom? Desmond's voice was smaller than I remembered, tentative in a way that reminded me of the little boy he'd once been. Hello, Desmond. I was wondering if we could talk. In person. I looked out at my garden, at the roses waiting to be planted, at the life I'd built without them. What about? About us. About what happened. Brian and I. We're having some problems. Of course they were. I'd wondered how long it would take for the cracks to show once they realized my money wasn't coming to solve their difficulties. I'm sorry to hear that. Could I come over? Just me. Brian doesn't. She doesn't want me to contact you. Despite everything, he was still my son. Despite all the pain, all the disappointment, some small part of me had been waiting for this call. All right. This afternoon? Thank you, Mom. Really? Thank you. He arrived at 2:00, driving the same BMW but looking somehow diminished. The confident lawyer who'd stood in my living room 6 months ago demanding his inheritance had been replaced by a man who looked tired, uncertain, older than his 38 years. I met him at the door, noting how his eyes took in the changes I'd made. The foyer now held a small table with fresh flowers from my garden. Family photos lined the walls. Not just pictures of him, but of Richard's relatives, of friends I'd reconnected with, of the book club members who'd become like daughters to me. The house looks different, he said. It looks lived in, I replied. Would you like some coffee? We sat in the sunroom, the space where I'd planned his disinheritance with Margaret. Now it was furnished with comfortable wicker chairs and plants that thrived in the afternoon light. A easel stood in one corner, holding my latest painting, a landscape of the view from my bedroom window. You're painting now? He asked, nodding toward the easel. I always painted, Desmond. I just stopped when I married your father, then never found time to start again. He nodded, staring into his coffee cup. I remember. You used to paint at the kitchen table when I was little. You have a good memory. We sat in silence for several minutes. I waited, knowing he'd come here for a reason, knowing he needed to find his own way to it. Brian left me, he said finally. I'm sorry. Are you? He looked up at me with something that might have been hope. Because she said you'd be happy. She said you probably planned this somehow. I set down my coffee cup carefully. I didn't plan your marriage ending, Desmond. I planned to protect myself from people who saw me only as a source of money. Is that really how you saw us? The question was asked with such genuine confusion that for a moment, I glimpsed the son I'd raised, the boy who'd believed the world was fundamentally fair, that good intentions were always visible. How else could I see you? When was the last time you called just to check on me? When was the last time you visited without wanting something? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I can't remember, neither can I. But I did love you. I do love you. Do you? Or do you love the idea of me? The mother who's supposed to be there whenever you need her, who's supposed to sacrifice without question, who's supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you throw her way. Tears gathered in his eyes. That's not. I never thought of it that way. I know you didn't. That's the problem. He leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Mom, I know I made mistakes. We both did. But I'm here now, trying to fix things. What exactly are you trying to fix? Our relationship. Us. I miss you. Do you? Or do you miss the security of knowing I was there, ready to bail you out when things got difficult? His face flushed. That's not fair, isn't it? Your wife left you, and suddenly you remember you have a mother. Your financial situation is probably strained without the inheritance you were counting on, and now you want to rebuild our relationship. The money doesn't matter. Stop. My voice was sharper than I'd intended. Don't lie to me, Desmond. Not anymore. We're past that. He slumped back in his chair, looking defeated. Okay. Yes, things are tight. The divorce is expensive, and we'd counted on. We'd hoped. You'd hoped to inherit my house and live here rent-free while using my savings as your personal bank account. When you put it like that, it sounds awful, because it was awful. You and Brian treated me like a resource to be managed, not a person to be loved. But I did love you, he insisted. I still do. I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown so accustomed to. Instead, I saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine remorse. Tell me about the divorce, I said. When she realized the money wasn't coming, she changed. She started talking about finding someone with better prospects, someone whose family had more to offer. He laughed bitterly. She said I'd failed her by not being able to control my own mother. And the baby? His face crumpled. She terminated the pregnancy, said she wasn't going to be tied down to a man who couldn't provide the lifestyle she deserved. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Whatever I thought of Brian, the loss of a grandchild I'd never know was a pain I hadn't expected. I'm sorry, Desmond. That's unforgivable. She said it was your fault, that if you'd just given us the house, none of this would have happened. Do you believe that? He was quiet for a long time, staring out at my garden where butterflies danced among the flowers. I wanted to. It was easier than admitting I'd married someone who only loved me for what I could give her. The same way you only loved me for what I could give you? The words hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. Desmond's shoulders began to shake, and I realized he was crying. Really crying. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen before, but the broken sobs of a man who'd finally understood what he'd lost. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. For not defending you, for taking you for granted, for letting her treat you the way she did. I'm sorry for not being the son you deserved. I watched him cry, this man who'd hurt me so deeply, and felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness. That would take time, if it came at all. But perhaps the beginning of understanding. Desmond, look at me. He lifted his head, his face red and wet with tears. I need you to understand something. I didn't change my will to punish you. I changed it to protect myself. I couldn't keep giving pieces of myself to people who saw those pieces as their right rather than my gift. I know, I see that now. Do you? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear because you're hoping I'll change my mind about the money? The question hit him like a physical blow. I don't know. I want to say the money doesn't matter, but I can't honestly tell you that losing it didn't bring me here. His honesty surprised me. At least you're being truthful. I'm trying to be. I'm trying to figure out how to be the person you raised me to be instead of the person I became. I poured myself more coffee, considering. What would that look like? I don't know. Learning to live with less, maybe. Figuring out how to be alone without feeling sorry for myself. Calling you just to talk, not because I need something. And if I told you right now that the will isn't changing, that you'll never inherit this house or my money, what then? He was quiet for a long time. Then I guess I'd have to learn to live with that. And maybe I'd ask if I could still visit sometimes, not to convince you to change your mind, but just to spend time with you. Why? Because you're my mother. Because I love you, even if I've done a terrible job of showing it. Because I don't want to lose you completely. I looked at this man, my son, my greatest success and my deepest disappointment, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The will isn't changing, Desmond. His face fell, but he nodded. I understand. But you can visit, if you want to. If you can accept that this relationship has to be different from what it was before. Different how? Equal. No more expectations that I exist for your convenience. No more assumptions that my love comes without conditions. No more taking without giving. I'd like to try. It won't be easy. Trust is earned, not inherited. I know. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my roses, finally planted and beginning to bloom. There's something else you should know. Silver Connections is planning to use this house as a residential facility in a few years, when I'm no longer able to live here alone. And you're okay with that? I'm looking forward to it, to being surrounded by people who understand what it's like to be discarded by family, and who've learned to make family out of friendship instead. Will there be room for family who want to do better? I turned back to him, seeing not the entitled man who'd demanded his inheritance, but the uncertain boy who'd once depended on me for everything. I suppose that depends on the family, doesn't it? He smiled then, a real smile that reminded me why I'd loved him so fiercely for so many years. Can I help you in the garden? I remember you used to let me plant things when I was little. I'd like that. As we walked outside together, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The money would still go to charity. The house would still become a haven for people like me. But maybe, just maybe, it would also become a place where a mother and son could learn to love each other again, not out of obligation or expectation, but out of choice. It was more than I'd dared to hope for, and exactly what I'd been brave enough to demand. A love worth having, or nothing at all. In the end, I'd gotten both. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.